Welcome to my channel, Creepix. Today I have another horror story for you. I didn't work in the forest back then, but spent a lot of time there and had a terrifying thing happen the late summer of 1981 outside of LaPine, Oregon. My mom had passed away in January of that year, and my dad felt like we needed some bonding time, with a little escape from town for a few days. He had a '68 VW Westphalia that he'd been working on getting camping ready, and he was excited to use it. The campsite was on a property belonging to a friend of my dad's named Jerry, and was northeast of LaPine by 20 miles or so. I've looked at maps since then and have no idea where it was. It was a long time ago, and as a 13-year-old punk-ass kid at the time who wasn't paying attention. We left Portland on a Monday, close to noon, and got to the campsite about 4 hours or so later, around 4 to 4:30. The campsite was quite a ways down a fairly rough gravel road that turned to dirt single track after the first 5 to 6 miles. My dad remarked that he didn't think anyone had been there in quite a while, based on his friend Jerry's statements and the amount of overgrowth on and around the road. We got to the site and set up camp, which was in a small clearing at the end of the road. Camp was simply parking the van, pulling out the awning, old school with poles and ropes, unloading the cooler, making a fire pit, and setting up chairs. As a typical 13-year-old, I wouldn't even consider sleeping in the van with my dad, so I pitched a small tent near the passenger rear of the van and tossed in my stuff for the night. After setting up camp, we hiked around a little and checked out the area. There was a small creek that was getting close to dried up, and while it wasn't heavily forested, it had the typical eastern Oregon high desert type of scrub vegetation with a few stands of small trees. My dad was a retired Multnomah County sheriff turned full-time musician, and he liked his cocktails. So by the time we'd finished dinner and were sitting around the fire, it was probably 8:30 to 9 or so, and he was on martini number 4, possibly 5. We heard coyotes yipping in the distance, and Dad thought he'd get them going with a few calls of his own. He did a couple stereotypical coyote calls, and they replied. He did a couple more, they replied, and then got silent. Everything got silent, except my dad. He called again, and the reply this time was most definitely not a coyote. It was a roar, scream, shriek from the southeast of us that must have easily lasted 10 to 15 seconds. Dad looked at me and literally said, "What the fuck was that?" I was shook, but young and curious. He coyote howled again, and we heard another scream, this time a little closer and a little more to the east of us. At this point, Dad retrieved his pistol, loaded up, and suggested we think about turning in for the night. That's when we heard the third scream of the night. It was very close, probably within 50 to 75 feet, and we felt it as much as heard it. It was from the opposite direction, more north-northeast than the first two screams, and was very loud. Dad lost his shit, threw the cooler in the van, ripped the awning loose, and we got out of there as fast as that poor little VW would carry us, leaving everything else behind. We were dead silent until we stopped for fuel in Oak Ridge. Chatter after that was sparse and strained at best. Once home, we talked a little about it and agreed we had no idea what it was, and that keeping our mouths shut was probably a good idea. Since that time, I've grown up and had short career in music, doing production sound in both hard rock and country western. I have a good idea of how decibels work and what it takes to produce that level of sound pressure. In retrospect, it terrifies me what could have produced that volume of sound and how close it had to have been.